My name is Jenna Levitt, and this is my oral report for my online drama 30 class. I chose to compare two of the films that we had been assigned this semester, and I'll talk about some things like social concerns, political agendas, and economic ideas. The two films that I chose are La Bamba and Selena, and in these films, I believe a lot of the elements that I had just listed a second ago can overlap. So a lot of the points that I'll be making will fall into multiple categories. First off, I'm going to talk about some of the social concerns that overlap with economic ideas as well. There's a lot of similarities and differences between Richie Valens' experiences in La Bamba compared with Selena's experiences in the upcoming of mainstream music. Richie was born in and grew up in a poor neighborhood around the 1950s, and his father had died when Richie was really young. So he was basically raised single-handedly by his mother. Richie did have an older brother, but he was always getting into trouble, and he wasn't really home a lot. The two of them had a severe sibling rivalry going on, and more than anything, his brother wanted to get his family out of this poor neighborhood, but he could never really go about it in the right way. He would do things like sell drugs. Richie's home life alone was a big struggle that he had to overcome in order to make it as a famous singer. But he did overcome it, and he went after his dreams and was able to take care of his family basically single-handedly. Selena's home life was very different. Instead of starting from the bottom and working her way to the top like Richie had done, she was born and mostly grew up in a nice home and in a good neighborhood. Her entire family started a band and worked together, and even when they didn't want to practice, their father was forcing them to. Some things had happened, and their family had to end up selling their restaurant and their home, and they moved in with their uncle. And their uncle's house was a very small and crowded place to live. But despite this downfall, Selena and all of her family were very supportive and continued performing and traveling. She had spent most of her life on the road, and even though Selena was really the only sibling who became famous, none of her other siblings or family members felt like they were any less, and they were all happy for every accomplishment that she had. Another social concern that overlaps with economic ideas is in the scene where Selena is thinking about buying an expensive dress for one of her employees. The store employee makes some comment that basically made it sound like Selena probably couldn't afford the dress simply because she was Latino. Secondly, I'm going to discuss the issues that are mainly social concerns. Discrimination was a major role in both of these films, and as Richie Valens' career came about in the 1950s, it seemed as though the discrimination he faced was a little bit harsher than the discrimination that Selena faced in the 1990s. In La Bamba, Richie fell in love with this white girl named Donna from his high school, and he was constantly facing discrimination from her parents, mainly her father, because they would never let them see each other. Every time he would call, her father would say that she isn't home, and she was never allowed to go out and see him. So her father basically prevented them from furthering their relationship simply because Richie was Latino. I believe that Selena had a bigger struggle because she was a female. The music business in the 1990s had very few females that were successful, and no Latino successful females at all. So once Selena started playing more, she thought that Mexico would be a better fit for her. Her dad disagreed though. He explains to her and her brother that Mexicans are worse than Americans. He says he explains how hard it is to be Mexican American, and that he says Americans are judging them for being Mexican, and Mexicans are judging them for not being Mexican enough. He tells her because of this, Mexico isn't a good idea, and because she can't speak Spanish, that the press would basically eat her alive. There was times she played at fairs, and the crowd was basically empty. Nobody would come and see her or her siblings play simply because they're not really interested in the female artist, and they just want to see the guy bands play. Next, there were some things that are both social concerns and political agendas. Both Richie and Selena were Mexican American. They both never spoke Spanish before in their lives, and the only difference between them during their upcoming into mainstream music was that Selena started her career by singing in Spanish. This was hard because while performing in front of Mexicans, if her Spanish wasn't perfect, then they wouldn't take her seriously. So Selena really had to work hard to make sure that her Spanish was flawless while performing. It was only until the end of her career when she was allowed to sing in both Spanish and English. Richie Valens, on the other hand, was forced to drop the Mexican side of him completely, and he was forced to change his name to be more Americanized, and he had to sing in all English. It wasn't acceptable for him to sing in Spanish songs while he was trying to make a name for himself. And it wasn't until near the end of his career when it was okay for him to sing La Bamba, which was a Spanish song. They both faced a lot of discrimination due to their race. They both were Mexican American and were trying to drop half of who they were in order to become famous. The fact that Selena was a girl and was trying to become famous during a time where every serious artist was male was a difficult struggle that she had to overcome. She had a wonderful support system, and I believe that this and her desire to become famous is what gave her the ability to switch over into mainstream music. Richie Valens' family life wasn't as well off, and his relationship with his brother was a difficult thing for him to overcome. The last issues I'm going to talk about are the political ones. Richie Valens had to change his name just to appeal to the American culture. And I think in the 1950s, Richie's experience, he experienced more discrimination because it was a time where people of all different cultures were mixing in the United States. And there was a lot of uneasy feelings towards that mixing. The civil rights movement hadn't even taken place yet, and it was hard for any culture that wasn't white to get their name noticed. Selena also encountered a lot of discriminatory events. The 1990s was um, the country was a lot more open to all these new cultures being successful. And in the 1990s, a lot of time had passed in segregation, and the U.S. had become more diverse. So the United States was more welcoming to have a successful Latino musician. Ultimately, I think that both of their experiences were harsh, but I don't believe that one was more well off than the other. I think the hardest thing that they both had to go through was dying at such a young age. Their careers were both short-lived. Richie was terrified of planes, and he ultimately died in a plane crash when he was only 17, and that was only 8 months after signing a contract. Selena was very trusting towards everyone and was shot and killed by one of her own employees. This happened when she was only 23, so both of their careers were tragically cut short. And I think that they both could have been something truly great, even greater than what they were if they were only given more time to accomplish their dreams even further.